tell me about George McGovern. You actually, while you were at Yale, a little north of here, you were working on the campaign. He was one of the first interviews I did, Senator McGovern, and I actually found Senator McGovern as humble as could be, very, very insightful. Tell me, what new insight could you provide of Senator McGovern?
Of the 8 senators, the only one I ever met. I saw Proxmire once from a distance. I didn't even lay eyes on any of the other 6. McGovern was, I mean, you don't think of presidential candidates and humility in the same sentence very often, but he was. And
do you agree, George?
I do. He tells a couple stories that when we had dinner one night, and I was telling him I was working on a book and he was going to be in it, and he passed away I think back in 2012 or 13, 14. But he told me a story. He was on the Senate floor one night, and he went over to, and Walter Mondale came up to him. Mondale lost for president. Mondale won one state, his own, in Washington, D.C. McGovern won one state, Massachusetts, and Washington, D.C. And Mondale went up to McGovern after his 84 loss, and McGovern had lost 12 years earlier, keep in mind, after his 84 loss, and he said, Mondale said, "George, when do you get over this, when you lose like this?" And McGovern looked at him and said, "Fritz, I'll let you know." So I don't know that you ever get over a loss like that. There's a wonderful quote about presidential candidates coming out of the Senate, and a Vermont senator decades ago said the only cure in the U.S. Senate for the presidential virus is embalming fluid. And you go through this, especially if you're the nominee and you lose that dramatically. But then he told another story to me about Barry Goldwater, who had also lost. Goldwater carried Arizona and then 6 southern states where only white people were voting, predominantly in 1964, and they were Wallace states later. And McGovern went up to Goldwater right before he decided to run in 1971, and said, "Barry, I want to talk to you about how you run for president and what you do." And they were friendly enough. And at the end, McGovern said to Goldwater, "Well, I have a question. Why did you, at the end," those of you that are a little older might remember this or reading it, Goldwater, right before the election, came out in opposition to Social Security in 1964. It was a different era then. And so McGovern said, "Barry, why did you come out against Social Security?" And he said, I was working really hard. It was a week before the election. I knew I was going to lose. There's no way I was going to win. I was in St. Petersburg in Tampa. And my staff said, "You got to do another event." And he said, "I'm tired. I'm done. I'm not going to work anymore tonight. I'm done." He said, "No, you got to do another event." So he went to this center and he said, "I came out against Social Security to get even with my staff so they'd shut up." I don't know it exactly, but so McGovern had a sense of humor in telling these stories. But McGovern, the thing I love about McGovern, right before, maybe 3 years before he died, I was presiding over the Senate. Freshman senators in the majority party take turns doing that. I'm sitting there, there are 8 or 9 pages that sit on the steps beneath the presiding officer's table there. And the pages are 16 and 17 years old. This was 2007, 8, 9, something like that. And George McGovern just walked in the back of the chamber. Senators always have floor privileges if they retire, even if they retire. And I said to the pages, I said, "Do you know who that man is in the back?" And nobody did. And I said, "His name's George McGovern. Do you know his name?" None of them did. And he was a losing presidential candidate, right? And it kind of goes back to Marcus Aurelius maybe, and thinking about that. But I thought about that, and I closed that chapter. McGovern did something with Bob Dole that provided a minimum number of American dollars to give one hot meal a day to poor kids in 75, 100 countries around the world. Yep. And so even though I closed that chapter with, even though these young people didn't know who McGovern was, and for sure these people in the developing world, these poor kids that get one hot meal a day, they don't know who George McGovern was. They know they got a hot meal a day, and whether they remember McGovern or not, think of the impact he had in that world.
Amazing.